Hi, I'm Jack Skeels, CEO of Agency Agile. Welcome back to part 2, the new face of competition inside of the agency space and the world of agencies. Now, in our last module, we talked about consultancies. And we're going to dig into this more and say, well, if the consultancies are the ultimate competitor, the management consultancies, how do they compete? How do we stack up to them? In what ways are we better or worse or whatever? I don't know all the answers to those questions, but I do know how to talk about how different you are. And should you worry about this, by the way, this tie-up that happened several years ago between Accenture Interactive and Droga 5, right? Very, very interesting stuff. Now, I'm going to take you through about 7 or 8 different factors. One of the most interesting ones, I think, is knowledge management. In the knowledge management space, management consultancies work very hard to build huge bodies of knowledge on different industries. They make investment in those systems and training people, etc. And actually mentoring and getting people to get deep on deep topics is one of the key things that they do. So they bring very knowledgeable, experienced professionals into any industry they touch. Now, I've been in agencies a good bit, and I used to kid around like knowledge management. What are you talking about? We can't find last month's campaign right now. Okay? So tends to be a severe shortfall of knowledge management tools out there. Also, the way people move through the organization is not this highly planned, scripted, let's develop your skills and build a knowledge base of these things, but really more just a high turnover environment with battle-based promotions, etc. So you kind of see the comparison. Agencies tend to be an organization with shorter memory about things. Now, the way they sell and engage, again, a huge difference. The consultancies typically only sell large projects, millions of dollar projects. Now, they're good at doing this because they sell them as investments. I'll talk more about that later, but it includes well-defined ROI, etc. And because they do all these pieces so well, they're rarely competitive. And agencies, frankly, even if you have an AOR, a lot of times you're competing to just use that budgeted money, right? I put on here explorative ROI. It really is the idea that, I don't know, let's try the campaign and see what happens, right? The consultants will give an ROI. They'll say, we think you're going to save $5 million by spending this $8 million or something like that. Or maybe the other way around, spend $5 million, save $8 million. They can keep a high price because if procurement comes back and says, well, I only want to spend $4 million, they say, okay, you're only going to make $6 million with those changes. You want to throw that extra $2 million away, that's your business, right? So essentially, now, does any of that come true? Do they really save that money? I don't know that anyone has an incentive to actually go track that stuff down, okay? But they do good storytelling on it, and probably better storytelling than agencies do. Agencies actually may be a little bit more forthright or honest, maybe too much so sometimes. Now, staffing models. You got to envy the management consultant staffing model. It's really a model, and I have experienced one of our clients, well, multiple of our clients have been bought by the consultancies, but one of them is interesting because I was working there while the transition was going on, and they literally went to, people on new projects could only do 1 week allocations minimum. So you couldn't fractionalize people. If you've seen our NOCO, the chaotic organization videos, if you want to see one, let me know. We can fire it up for you and take you through a webinar on it. But basically, this is an amazing optimal way to run teams, and you get very high utilization, obviously, and it gives people deep focus with the client, whereas agencies are pretty much the exact opposite. People fluttering all over the place. Butterfly staffing, by the way, people usually ask in the live sessions. Butterfly staffing is when I have one art director on it and then pull them off to put them on something else, and then a week later drop a different art director in there who doesn't really know what the other one did or why they did it, all that kind of thing. Very, very inefficient staffing model driven in part by how fractional the engagements are as well. They're sold as very small engagements, typically 50,000 or 5,000 to do this versus 5 million over on the left-hand side of the diagram. The talent, admittedly, is different. They are different styles of organization. Management consultants hire people with good managerial skill sets, but that also really means that they're chosen for strong social and political savvy skills. They work well inside of organizations, and probably, agencies strive a little bit to get sort of nonconformists, people who wouldn't work inside of a client organization. And again, the treatment is actually quite thin for the agencies. Agency staff compared to management consultant staff don't get paid near as much. And essentially it's more, a lot of times it's more of a profession people love. Not that management consultants don't love what they do, but one done a little bit more out of passion for the business than necessarily savvy around the business. Now, client relations, here's a very, very interesting difference between the two styles of organizations. Management consultants, the organization has an ethos of the client being sacred, right? It's a strategic partnership. And, the survey work on this, you'll see people say, my relationship with that client was a significant source of personal growth, friendships, etc. in my life, right? And when they say client for life, they actually mean, I'm going to know you for a long, long time. I know back when I was in management consulting, that was sort of how we were. We actually, we ended up doing things, a lot of extracurricular stuff with our clients, etc. Agencies, you've seen the survey data, it's kind of crazy stuff. Client is stupid. In fact, there was a survey by Campaign a couple of years ago where 60 or 70% of the people said the client was the greatest source of personal challenge in their life, right? And so this is weird. The management consultants, by the way, might actually think their client is stupid or ignorant or uneducated about something, but they would view that through the lens of someone who views the client as sacred and say, there's a learner there, okay? Stupid doesn't mean unable to learn. It means someone who needs to learn. And who better than I to actually educate them? And again, that's deepening that relationship. Helping your client get better at doing things, at knowing things, learning things, deepens and reinforces that sort of depth of connection that the consultancies build with their clients. Now, I'd like to take a few minutes and talk about the commodity trap because it ties in with this. You'll notice the management consultancies have got something figured out. One of the things they have figured out is how to get paid a lot. Another thing they have figured out is how to have really long engagements. Well, it turns out this stuff is actually pretty well understood. I'm going to give you a download of some material in this field called the transactional duration of the relationship. And that's what researchers call stuff, weird names that are hard to understand, but here's the way it works. Transactional duration is what is the probability or the frequency or duration of the number of transactions I have with a client. I wanted to go buy a Diet Pepsi the other day. I was driving along the street and I saw a gas station with a mini market there, so I pulled in, I got that Diet Pepsi, paid for it, and started driving again. What's the probability I will ever buy from them again? It was in a random neighborhood, very low transactional duration, very low probability. Now, if they were near my house, then that's great. Then it probably a little bit higher. But of course, if I was near my house, I'd just get one from my house, right? But again, the Pepsi is a commodity. So essentially, they're not selling on any features and benefits except the fact they were on a street corner and the right street corner for me at that moment, right? So they don't have a lot going for them in that way. Long relationships would have to do with, for example, my relationship with Apple products, where they seem to actually figure out what I want before I know what I want. They're thinking ahead. And I tend to buy more Apple products. It used to be that way with Sony televisions and media accessories as well. So commodity nature, if you say you're being a commodity, it means that probability of you being engaged in short transactions or rare transactions is quite high. Okay, and the more strategic side of this arrow, the right-hand side, basically means the buyer perceives you as being a strategic provider. Okay, in other words, that you're making, and I'll show you some of the factors that drive this. Okay. Transactional selling focuses on the attributes of the sale. So I talk about it's a 16-ounce Pepsi bottle. Okay? Relational selling focuses on what I'm doing for that other person. Okay? What I'm doing for the seller. How the buyer is actually connecting with them. It's a relational, hence that term. Relational selling versus transactional. Now, here's the weird thing in the research. The more your client believes you to be strategic, the more likely they'll buy from you multiple times. Now, it goes both ways, but it does go this way, which is if you can convince your client that you're being strategic, they will be more likely to buy from you more times. In a sense, you only need to prove to them that you're being strategic, and that happens. But that means you'll be less of a commodity. You'll be less subject to price pressures, etc. And so if we lay this into sort of a behavioral matrix like this, the center column here is the attribute. Purchase rationale. Why are you buying from me? What am I selling to you? I'm selling prices and features. Diet Pepsi for $2.19, 20-ounce bottle. Commodity. ROI and value. You've got a lot riding on your tires, so buy Michelin tires. Okay? Show a baby, we're going to try and protect your children. Michelin tires are very safe. I talk about what the paybacks are, where the value is. Okay? That makes Michelin seem like a strategic, safe purchase that I'll be more likely to repeat. Needs orientation. Why am I buying this thing? If I'm buying a specific thing that I can specify very clearly, then it's a commodity. Because if I can specify it clearly, that is actually one of the classic definitions of a commodity, is that it's subject to specification. So if I start talking rate sheets and roles like art director for $120 an hour, I sound like I'm on the left-hand side. Instead, what I want to do is be over on the right-hand side and talk about what is it that the client really needs to succeed at this. Okay? And then sell that, not the specification side. A very interesting little topic, I'll talk more about it in a minute, also is what we call forward investment. This is, in fact, the forward investment is making an investment on your client's behalf in advance of being asked to do so. A lot of agencies I've talked to say, we make investments all the time. But what they really mean, typically, is that they're making an investment at the end of the project, which is when they've kind of screwed it up or gotten confused or didn't get aligned with the client properly, or the client changed their mind, and now their investment is to spend time trying to make it right. That's not forward investment, that's rearward investment, behind you investment. Can't get that word right. But forward investment is doing it in advance of the customer's need. I'll explain some examples, but actually I'll do one right now. The quickest one I can think of is out of my own history, where we took some amount of budget, I think it was $50,000 of internal budget, and spread it around our agency and said, everyone has to come up with ideas for this cruise line. You've got 2 weeks, and you can use this budget as a way to allocate your time on it. And at the end of 2 weeks, we brought the client in, and the client loved this stuff. And it was like, the client literally said, this is why I want an agency, to bring ideas like this to me. So we had a great relationship with that client, in part because we showed them we wanted to invest, and we sold a bunch of that stuff too, by the way. I think like $400K worth of that stuff. So it was a great payback. Plus our people loved doing it. Okay? So forward investment. Breadth of connections. Most agencies tend to revert to a single point of contact. Okay? If you have a single point of contact with the client, okay, then you essentially have a commodity relationship. You have a salesperson. Okay? You're buying something that you can pass through a person. the multi-multi, which is multiple people from the agency work with multiple people from the clients. And by the way, the consultancies do this amazingly well, sort of swarming meetings and finding matchups between people and building other relationships and the like. It makes you feel far more strategic and the like. Likewise, this will bring the death or the partial death of the big reveal is the level of work integration. So the big reveal where you get the assignment, go away for 2 weeks, come back and show a bunch of mood boards or comps or something like that. That's the little or none. That's the left-hand side. That means you're a commodity. Okay? Working with the client, like for example, the consultancies they would write a report that's actually going to be quote unquote authored by one of the clients. They would work with that client, crafting that report over a couple weeks, and then the client themselves could publish it internally and look like a winner. You just became really strategic at that point, right? Now, these are 5 of I think 8 or 9 different research methods or research factors that the research has found. These are 5 of some of the 8 or 9 factors found in the research, but they're some of the strongest ones in this context of what we're talking about. They drive some really interesting things. One is buyer dependence goes up. Buyers feel like they want to and need to work. I don't want to make that decision without talking to my agency, consultancy, whatever, because they're great advisors, or there are a lot of things they're thinking about which we should incorporate. Second is, of course, competitive advantage goes up in that situation where you're thought of as being more strategic. And also then, of course, the magic of pricing power. How much pricing power do management consultancies have? When a management consultancy buys an agency, typically they triple their rates. $120 an hour for that person, $360 an hour for them. They have the ability to command a lot of money because they provide a lot of strategic value. And they've seen all this research, so now you got to catch up with them on that. As you might imagine, transactional duration, when we do the side-by-side on that, essentially most of the way the agencies operate is on the left-hand side of the diagram, unfortunately. And the consultancies are just amazing at sort of using all this thinking and all the research from the B2B work. Now, if I haven't depressed you enough, I will tell you that there's some good stuff coming up ahead in the next modules and the like. And keep in mind, it's always darkest before the dawn. They invite you to go enjoy a great article where I got quoted on agile techniques and the like in the Wall Street Journal. See you in a few minutes.